Of this presentation, you will actually review what the role plays are, what simulations are, and then we will get to know why we use them in general in classes, and what does the teacher do while the students are doing role plays and simulations. And finally, we will work more in practice on how role plays and simulations will work in business English classes. So the first slide is all about what is a role plays, and as you can see in the photo, role plays are speaking activities, and in this form of activity you put yourself into an imaginary situation. So it's an imaginary situation and you are having a new character in this situation. So the people who are acting out the role play, they have imaginary characters. And in the next part, we're going to review what is a simulation. A simulation is also a speaking activity, and in this case, you put yourself into someone else's shoes. So it's an imaginary situation again, but this time you are not having an imaginary character. You are working in your own shoes and you are yourself in this kind of activity. So simulations are a bit complicated in comparison to role plays because they are a bit difficult to set up and organize in classes, and sometimes it makes the learners confused when they are working with simulations, and this confusion makes it challenging even for the teacher. But if you do the simulations, the planning and everything well, simulations can host of activities that are actually their demand, the learners demand in their own real work environment. So these kind of activities are a kind of free practice. They can practice the language in different ways. They can express themselves, they can take risks, they can make mistakes in doing them, and it can also come from another phase of the lesson, which you previously taught them some particular language and they practice it in more controlled ways. And it can help the development of all kind of skills, from grammar to vocabulary to fluency and accuracy. For example, and let me give you an example for these kind of activities. For example, when you take the role of a manager in an organization, meeting to negotiate or solve problems. So, okay, we know what simulations and role plays are in general. Let's go to the next slide, which tells us why we use role plays and simulations in general. The first reason for using them is that these kind of activities get the learners talking, and that's usually the final aim for taking part in a language class. The other reason is using key vocabulary, the vocabularies they've learned probably in a passive way, and they are going to put it into practice in an active way through some communication. The next one is when they get to do these kind of activities, they can mimic real life situations. And in particular for business English learners, they can just practice their own real actually work experiences. And based on Jeremy Harmer, in general, role plays are fun and motivating, which is the same in business English classes. And it helps the quiet learners to get to express themselves in a way. And also in these kind of activities, the learners have a wider range of language opportunities to use the language in different ways. So in the next slide, I'm going to tell you what is the role of the teacher when they are working in a role play or simulation. The teacher has got three main roles when they are working role plays and simulations. The first one is a facilitator. This is the time when the students may need some language, some new language to be fed in by the teacher. So if the rehearsal time is an appropriate um, is an appropriate way, the feeding in of the new language should take place at this stage. So you give them the language, they self-correct, they peer correct, and they get to use the target language in an appropriate way. The teacher also can take the role of a spectator, and in this way the teacher watches the role play and also offers some comments and advices at the end. And for the last role of the teacher, we have the participant role of the teacher. Sometimes you get to get involved in the role play and simulation, and you take part in the role play yourself. For example, in the case of business English classes, probably you take the role of a customer, which comes to the situation and the company and the people who are in charge. In the next slide, I'm going to tell you about three tips which are dramatic when you are working with role plays. These tips can help you to have more real life and more interesting role plays and simulations. If you use real objects and props in the class, so if you are working in company, the real objects are just there. You just have the classes in different rooms of the company, so everything is real. And you can also use props. I'm not sure about this one, so correct me if I'm mistaken. Props for having in role plays and simulations can be, I don't know, the graphs, the charts, the checklists, the forms to be filled out, and the tables, if I just didn't say that. So we can have different props in business English classes when they are working on role plays. The other item is rearranging the furniture, and as you can see in this picture, they are just sitting around the table and talking over on a topic. It is very easy to actually arrange if you are again working in company, but if you are working in the form of a classroom, you can just rearrange the sitting so that you can do the role play for different purposes. And the last item is using real and relevant topics when they get interested to talk more and to share more, because it is related to what they do at work. So it helps them to talk more in these kind of activities. In the next part, I'm going to tell you again why we use role plays and simulations, but this time not in general, in particular for business English. So now, why having them in business English classes? I should say that most people believe that business English is about learning technical business language, and that's true. But they need to know that if actually it never succeeds without the language used in context. So according to Evan Frendo, business English teachers need to focus on three key components in particular. The first one is linguistic competence, which deals with the language elements at basic level. The next one is intercultural competence, which deals with cultural issues affecting teaching the language. And finally, the discourse competence, which deals with language use. And this is how people interact with each other within a context. For example, when they are negotiating, when it comes to correspondence, presentations, service encounters, meetings, and much more. So there is also a wider spread enthusiasm for the approach known as CLT, which aims to develop learners' ability to use the language to communicate. So I guess these reasons are good enough to have role plays and simulations in business English classes. So let's go to the next slide, in which I'm going to tell you how role plays and simulations will work in practice. So in the first one, we have a role play, and as you can see, we have two students. So we call them student A and student B. And as you can see, they have a piece of paper or card in their hands. And they typically work in pairs in this form of activity. So it sounds like more an information gap activity in which the learners take on roles, but they do not play themselves, and their behavior and even their opinions are limited to the options they have on the card. And in this case, for having this kind of activity, before they get to do the role play, we need to first build the context. Probably we do this through eliciting some information from the learners, and sometimes we have a written correspondence or even a listening and writing task. When the context is built, the language to be used may also have been pre-taught in some way, so we pre-teach the vocabulary, and we should think about what the students will need to say in the role play. So we make notes of any specific grammar skills they will need to actually fulfill their roles. And we will teach them through some tasks. For example, there is a scenario in which one person is training another on business practices, and it is a good scenario, a good task for talking about the imperative form, as well as ordinal transitions between ideas. For example, we teach them first, next, after that, lastly, and so on. Another example is when your students will be giving a sales pitch. It's a great time to review the conditionals this time. For example, you teach them, if you buy our product, then blah blah. So I should tell you something, that if you didn't teach them any grammar before the role play, you can help them with some grammatical structures as they are working in the role play. And this time your role, as I mentioned before, is a facilitator. So before they get to work in front of everybody and for you as an observer, they have some preparation time, and they have a reminding look. They still have the cards and the notes with them, and they can just look at them from time to time for reviewing things and ideas and what they are going to share. And I should tell you that these kind of activities are very good for pre-experienced learners when they get to learn about different situations in a workplace. The next slide is going to tell you about different types of role plays we can have in the class, specifically in business English classes. For example, negotiating a contract, giving a product presentation, asking for additional resources, complaining about services rendered, delegating tasks, recruit possible employees, job interviews, and budget presentations. So these are the items and topics we can set and design the role plays for a business English class. In the next slide, actually, the second form of activities, we have the simulations. As you can see, we have again two learners. This time I'm not going to label them student A and B, because probably we have this kind of activity in the form of group one. So we have learners, but this time there's no card in hand, and it sounds more like a problem solving activity when they get to share ideas and they get to talk about it. But for having this form of activity, we need to prepare them in advance. So there are some stages for having these kind of activities in the class. The first one is preparation, and we need to have an effective planning and preparation for these simulations, because if not, they would not actually come in handy for the people who are working them, because they are just more like the real life situations, scenarios they're going to use in their own workplace. So you, as a teacher, you need to think about different stages you're in the preparation time. Actually, the preparation time is for both the teacher and the learner. Sometimes for you as a teacher, you need to think about the stages of the stimulation, what they need to do at each stage to progress the next stage, what time, how much time you have for each stage, and also the thing which is very important is the purpose of the activity. For example, you would say that, okay, in this simulation, my aim, actually the lesson aim, is to practice meeting skills and making suggestions. So it's very important to think about them before the class, and also for the students, the learners, to work in this kind of activity. Probably they need to prepare even before the class, so they need to get prepared before the class. Then we have the simulation. They come to class, they work together as in pairs or in role, actually groups, let's say. And while they are working in simulation, you just need to make sure they are on track, so you monitor them very carefully. And there is another stage which we call feedback, and in this feedback, for having a good feedback, you need to record the materials you're using. Sometimes you use a video, so you just use your camera, your cell phone. Sometimes you record their audio, and sometimes, very simple, you take notes. And in this stage, when you are giving the feedback, you need to reflect specifically on the purpose of the stimulation in the first place. Sometimes your main purpose for holding this kind of activity as simulation is just primarily seeking to develop confidence and a spoken fluency. So when you are giving them the feedback, it needs to be very positive and encouraging, and probably quite short for them. And for this kind of activities, I should say that we call them a free practice, in which they freely talk about different ideas over the same topic, probably the same problem. So they boost their communication skills, and very important, it is very effective for experienced learners when they talk about the issues they've came over at different times in their jobs. So let's go through a quick comparison between simulations and role plays. Simulations can be done with more participants than role plays. As I told you, role plays are typically delivered in pair works, but for simulations we can have actually group works. We need to spend more time for simulations. For doing the simulations, we need more advanced and experienced learners. And also, when we are working on simulations, we need to focus more on fluency. For the role plays, we probably focus on specific language functions. There is no constraints when working on simulations. That's why we call it a free practice of language. But when they are working on role plays, there is a card in hand, and they need to go based on what they have on the cards. And as I told you, for doing the simulations, we need a lot of preparation even before the class time. But for role plays, they can have the rehearsal part, the stage, and the preparation on the task and in the class. And there is also a good book about simulations I found. It's Business Roles, 12 Simulations for Business English. And in this book you can find different scenarios related to business English. You can also find teacher notes, and also the lesson planning of each scenario. So it's a good book to just take a look for using simulations in the class. And because simulations are much more practical for business English classes, I'd like to share this quote from Chris Barwood, which says, simulations can be used as an effective teaching technique in business English classes and offers a sample lesson plan that simulates a business meeting. So I guess simulations are much more practical for business English classes. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. All the best. Many thanks.